On today's episode, Joey's PHT success story. Welcome to the podcast helping you overcome your proximal hamstring tendinopathy. This podcast is designed to help you understand this condition, learn the most effective evidence-based treatments, and of course, bust the widespread misconceptions. My name is Brodie Sharpe. I'm an online physiotherapist, recreational athlete, creator of the Run Smarter series, and a chronic proximal hamstring tendinopathy battler. Whether you are an athlete or not, this podcast will educate and empower you in taking the right steps to overcome this horrible condition. So let's give you the right knowledge along with practical takeaways in today's lesson. I was excited to get Joey on despite him driving for the first minute or so of our conversation. So you might hear a bit of road traffic noises, but excited to have him on because, first of all, fun guy, very passionate and loving life, and just a different PHT background. I guess he can explain that in a second, but not much of a runner. Well, not purely in the running sense. But not purely a gym goer either. And yeah, has a really extensive and comprehensive story that sort of got him turning the corner and finally overcoming PHT. And so that's why I was excited to have him on. Probably goes to show in this episode that you can be an athlete, you can be a recreational athlete or competitive, or you could just be a sedentary person. These principles tend to carry over into any population. And like I say, Joey was really fun to have on. I'm excited to bring you his story. So let's dive in. Joey, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for helping me out.
Yes, I know you're driving at the moment and you're going to pull over soon. So for those who people might hear some car noises and maybe some road rage in the background.
Yeah. It's not rush hour yet. There shouldn't be any of that, but it's coming.
All right, good mate. Well, one really interesting reason why I want to have you on is because your, I guess, athletic background is quite different to the runners or cyclists, triathletes, and that sort of stuff that I usually have on. So would you mind introducing yourself and sort of where that athletic background comes from?
Well, I grew up, I've lived in San Diego my entire life. And due to weather, probably a lot like Australia, people are active year round. So I grew up playing the traditional, typical sports of American football, wrestling, dabbled in boxing, things like that, and a lot of surfing, so on. So I'm kind of athletic my whole life, or active my whole life. Then got married, had kids, and just became more of a gym rat. I was never an endurance athlete, though. I never did any legitimate endurance activities. And then at 41 years old, my coworker, who is a serious, an accomplished endurance athlete, had invited me to do something called a Marine Corps mud run. It was a 10K run where you do a bunch of obstacles, and like I said, I did zero cardio. I did none of that stuff at that point in my life. I was 41 and had just been going to the gym and lifting weights, but I just thought, how hard can it be? So I went out there and I just about died. And I realized for the first time in my life, oh my God, I have no cardio. And so I decided to take up running. But because I also wasn't in the endurance community on any level, I knew nothing about all of that. I just thought to be a better runner, just put on some shoes and start running. So I started doing that, and I just ran as far as I could, as fast as I could, every chance I got. And I got faster, and I was able to run further, and I was able to run faster, but I also was just piling up one injury after another. And the injuries are what caused me to start trying to figure out, why is this happening? ITB was my first major issue, and that's why I started learning. Oh wow, there's an art to this. And I started learning. There's a process, but because of the sports I was in before, where you just do everything hard as you can all the time. I even though I read a lot of this stuff, chi running, these things, trying to fix my ITB, I didn't really listen. I just still pushed and pushed and pushed. And then in about, I'd say about 5-6 years into it, I would be, I guess, an okay runner in the world of runners. I had, running a 10K at about a 7.5 minute pace and 7 minute pace. Ran a half marathon, but always hurting. And about that time, I was at the beach and I slipped playing with my daughters, playing a paddleball game, and it's the first time I felt a pain, like an injury to my right hamstring tendon up by where my butt is. And from that point forward, every time I ran, it would hurt. And because I didn't want to lose my running conditioning, I never took a break. So I became Dr. Google and I started looking, trying to figure out what's going on. And my oldest daughter was at UCLA, and I had to drive 2 to 3 hours to see her regularly. And I couldn't sit that long. I'd have to literally lean the entire way on one butt cheek. Sorry, but that's what I did to get there. And never understood what was truly going on. I knew what started it, but I couldn't understand why it wouldn't go away. But because I'm hard-headed, I wouldn't take any time off, and I continued this years. So it stayed, the pain would stay, or the inflammation would stay anywhere from a 4 or 5 on the pain scale up to a 9 or a 10 sometimes, where just painful. And I just continued for years. And then about 2 years ago, I'd say, I was trail running downhill, and I stumbled, and in the effort, that kind of downhill, out of control, lunging, trying to, if my arms are flailing, I felt the exact same thing happen to the left one. And I recognized it. It's an exact spot really high up behind my butt. And now here I am. Both sides are messed up. And in that same effort, I re-injured my right, but now I added my left, which was new. Never really had the issue. And then again, back to Dr. Google, and that's how I stumbled on you. Well, first of all, let me back up. I finally went and saw a doctor for the first time. Up until then, I hadn't actually went and seen a doctor. So I went. They sent me to I forget the guy's specialty, and they gave me an MRI of both hamstrings. And then I got to talk to the surgeon afterwards, who said, "You've got this proximal hamstring tendinopathy." He goes, "You've got some thickening, you got some scar tissue." The right one has some thickening and some scar tissue and things. The left one was just inflamed. He had tendinitis and tendonitis. I can't remember. I think I showed you. But I had 2 things going on in both of them. And he said, "I can get in there and I can operate on both of them and fix them, and you'll need to take a full year off in the recovery." And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to do that. That's not an option for me." And he goes, "Well, the other option would be we can try something that may or may not work. It's called PRP injection, where I do what's called dry needling. I'll just go into your hamstring tendon. I'll poke a bunch of holes in it, and then I'll inject some of your plasma into it. And that works for some people, not for others. It's worth a try." And I said, "All right." And so that's what I did on both hamstrings. And word of caution, if anybody out there hears this and wants to do it, I opted to not use any anesthesia. No, they have one that's true anesthesia, and they have another one that's like you're just sedated. I chose neither, and I would never make that mistake again. It's unbearably painful. But nonetheless, I did it. And during that process is when I really started digging for information, and I found you. I found your other podcasts. You have 2. The one that was just specifically about hamstring tendinopathy, and I'm like, holy, and I'm listening to it, and you were describing, for the first time I've heard someone echo back to me exactly what I'm going through. Like a few things you said that just stuck out at me. Like, oh my God, that's it. The shoe off test, these certain things I was spending years doing. Like, I couldn't just kick off my shoes by putting one foot behind the other heel and do that. There's a lot of things I just couldn't do anymore. Everything you spoke about was almost like you're talking directly to me or read my mind. So I started uh, doing some of those things, and then realized after the PRP injections, I need someone like you who understands this injury to help me rehab, because I didn't want to go through basically the geriatric ward of my healthcare center, which is not for aged. I'm an aged athlete, is what they call me, and I knew I'd be treated like a convalescent person, and I didn't want that. So I contacted you, and we started building a program, and it worked.
Yeah. And I think at the stage when it was like a week or so after having those PRP injections, and you said that the pain had significantly reduced because of those injections, but we were just now sort of rebuilding up to trying to come up with a structure to, I guess, rebuild you back up to your fitness goals. But you then mentioned, okay, I do hyrox, courses. Can you just explain what that
Right.
is?
So hyrox is because, like I said, I was a gym rat, trying to make my muscles big. The transition to running, and then I found this sport called hyrox. It's HYROX. It started out in Europe, and it's what they call hybrid athlete test. They wanted the CEO decided he wanted to create a sport where you couldn't be like a little CrossFit muscly guy or a really thin endurance athlete. He wanted to find something that required an equal amount of both. So it's an 8K run broken up into 8 1,000-meter sprints. In between each of those 1,000-meter sprints is going to be a heavy um, uh, zone. So like in one case, it's a 360-pound sled push that goes 50 meters. You run 1,000 meters, then you do a row for 1,000 meters, then run 1,000 meters. Wall balls with a 20-pound wall ball to 10 feet. You do 100 of those, which if you haven't done that, just give it a shot. It'll kill you. You throw the ball up to 10 feet and then run 1,000 meters. So you have 10 of these. One of them is a kettlebell carry. You pick up 32-kilogram kettlebells, one in each hand, and you run for 200 meters. And then again, and you go for 1,000-meter sprint. So they're physical strength tests combined with running in the idea that you create the hybrid athlete. So I had right after getting in, I qualified for the World Championship in 2021, but I got hurt, like I said, trail running, and that took me out, so I wasn't able to do it. So now my goal is to get back to that, which I've already qualified. I competed in December. I took first place in my age group. And so now my goal is to compete as a pro, which simply means for hyrox, heavier weights. Everything's the same. Now I have to push 440-pound sled, and I weigh 160. So that's going to be a challenge. Heavier kettlebells and things like that. But for the most part, it's the same race, just heavier weights, same run distances.
Yeah. Why I say that is because, sometimes obviously we work when working with athletes. What are their goals? Okay, is it a marathon? Is it an Ironman? And I hadn't really heard of hyrox, and you were just listing off the list of stages, and I was just like, this is so much work for your hamstring. You got the sled pushes, you got the wall balls, and then you've got the sprints in between those stages. And so just looking at the amount of load that we need to get you back to seemed like we really needed to work very carefully with introducing a lot of these things. I didn't want to put words in your mouth when it comes to the outcome of the PRP, but I thought, could you share that? What was your reaction like, days, weeks, months after the PRP injection?
Immediately after, I opted to drive there myself because I told my wife, don't worry, it's no big deal. And I had no idea. It took me, I don't know, 15 minutes to get to my car. So short term, it was excruciatingly painful. The worst pain I had experienced And that level of pain lasted until like the next day, I'd say. And then it started to subside, and became tolerable. I I should probably kept notes. I don't have a perfect timeline, but the pain it evenly decreased over, I'd say, a week or two. I don't know if you kept notes. I can't remember, but about that, I'd say it was ready to start doing some stuff, start doing some light conditioning.
I think with
But
the
yeah.
past clients, it was actually good that you had that outcome. I've seen. I think I might do a podcast episode on PRPs. But the like your specialist said, like we're not sure if it's going to work or not, and you opted for it, which I think is pretty good advice because I've seen a lot of people have PRP and it make no difference. I've seen some people have PRP and actually increases their symptoms. And so there's, it seems like a bit of hit and miss, but a bit different to your initial injury. Your initial onset is what we call like a bit more traumatic or an acute onset of symptoms. It was more of a one movement lunge slide where you sort of felt something in your high hamstring, where some other people's onset might be very slow and gradual, where they just run a little bit more or run a little bit faster, and it just slowly develops over time. So those two different onsets, which is why like every condition is different and should be treated differently. But yeah, nonetheless, we had your PRP, a couple of weeks later, we start working together. We start coming up with like a formula and a plan. Was there anything in particular that you found, I guess, different? Was there anything about the structure that we laid out that you're a bit surprised about? Can you recall back then?
Uh, I wouldn't say surprised because I'd listened so much about your book, and I listened to so much of your podcasts. So I kind of, I guess it'd be like describing how to make a cake, right? You could tell someone all the ingredients. I knew the ingredients because I'd heard everything you'd said. So I knew I needed eggs and flour and salt, and I'm going to need all the things I needed. But I still didn't understand how to apply it. What combinations, how much of this versus how much of that, how much. And so I needed that, and as it applies to me as the type of athlete, I have 58-year-old, where one leg is 10 years of this tendinopathy, the other leg is 1 year, and trying to get back. And so all those things I knew I needed tailored directly to me, and although I knew the ingredients, I didn't know how to apply them, how much of each, what the doses would be, or the measurement would be for each thing. So you're able to put that together for me in a very, very precise way, and I was
Yeah.
very happy.
I'd say it sort of challenged my abilities to structure in things as well, because mainly working with runners, I'm very um, like I've got a lot of experience with saying, okay, this first week we won't do any running. Let's just work out some strength exercises and see what strength exercise you can tolerate. Once we find that out, let's layer in some running, usually some like really easy walk runs, then just progress based on symptoms, a little bit more running, a little bit less walking, a little bit heavier lifting, and then just sprinkle those layers in. But for you, not only were we coming off the PRP, so we had to be very careful about how we apply load to make sure the tendons are tolerating that after that procedure. But I think we started off the first week, you know, we had you doing some like a high rehab day and a low rehab day, whereas the low rehab day would be like more like body weight style things, short range of movement, but then the higher rehab days being more like your deadlifts, trying to go heavy, but reduced range of movement, seeing how that was tolerated. And then once we found that layer, we then piled on top of that a walk run program, which started off with a lot of walking, not a lot of running, all really easy running as well, which, over the course of working together, it sounds like you were a bit frustrated about wanting to, kick it up a notch, but slowly piecing everything together and making sure that symptoms were falling within acceptable limits. Can you remember, like in the first couple of weeks, first couple of months, how you felt your tendon was responding?
Yeah, I do. I remember that there were certain exercises that you can tell. I guess maybe my gym rat years, I learned a lot, and then early sports, I learned a lot about how to uh, assess my own body. I can just tell when things are working, how they're working, and so I was able to, when some of the exercises, I can immediately tell, oh, this is going to be good. I can tell what I'm like, and some of them surprised me. The like for instance, I had never done hip thrusts ever in my life, and in the beginning, like you said, we were going really light, and I was just doing the isometric version, and I can feel it was. Remember, I think I told you it would get kind of hot, not painful, just I was like, wow. And but when I would stand up afterwards, I immediately knew there was a benefit. I can tell. Um, so early on, I do recall certain exercises I can tell I immediately knew they were working. They were doing something good for me. Um, and then other ones I brought up with you, I was worried about. And what was great about working with you was um, you immediately would switch things up and kind of tailor them to things that. And that I've told a few friends about you, and that I'm not used to someone taking the feedback and redesigning that the very next day or the very next week, right there on the spot, to give me the same volume of exercises but in a different way. And I think that was really the best part of the process, because like you said, it was that whole saying, trust the process, because there's a lot of times where I knew I felt better but I wasn't better, and I wanted to go and test it, and a few times I accidentally did, but that wasn't deliberate. A few times I just misunderstood, and you were very clear, because when I went back and looked at the Google sheet, it was written out there quite clear what not to do, what to do, and how to do it. I just, my attention span isn't the greatest, or my attention to detail, but when I did adhere to the program, I saw continuous progress. But like you said, I was so eager to get back at it.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a few things to unpack there, because it's it's almost quite dangerous when you start getting improvements. I've done a podcast episode on this, like when getting better can be dangerous, and it's essentially like highlighting if you have 2 good weeks, 3 good weeks, 4 good weeks of like almost getting symptom free. People's mindset is like, yes, I'm back. Let's get into it. Let's grind. Let's work. We've got these
oh
races to prepare for. We've got world champs to look forward to. And then,
yeah,
people just hit the accelerator, and it's sort of, gets them into trouble, gets them into a setback. And then their mindset just plummets, because they're like, I was feeling so good. Now I feel like I'm back at square
right.
one. There's a lot of things a lot of the roller coaster of emotions to go through there. But another thing that you said was the ability to at least moderate a plan so that you're still really active. Like in the early days, trying to be as active as you can be, because a lot of fears for a lot of athletes is, if I go to see a physio or a PT or a doctor, they're just going to tell me not to do the activity that I love. And that's a lot of the fear. They say, you know what, they're going to tell me I just can't run, and I'm just going to ignore them. And so what's the point of even going and getting it checked out? But um, one thing that I try and do as a therapist is see, okay, how much can we get away with? How much running, how much exercise, how much gym workouts can we get away with, and try and do as much as possible without flaring things up? Because one, that would raise the strength and capacity, but two, like your mindset, if you're an athlete and you're doing a workout every day, even though it might not be as intense or as long as you want, we're at least doing something every day, you're still feeling like you're productive, still feeling like you're exercising, and you're sort of getting that endorphin hit, and that rehab experience, that rehab journey is a little bit more tolerable. But then you said that, there were some hiccups, there were some flare-ups, and you might not have adhered to the plan in some stages. Can you remember what components within that might have led you away and generate that flare-up?
Oh, I know for sure what it is. It's something about running. What for me is fast. I know in the world of runners, this is not fast, but in my world of hybrid athletes that are a little more boxy and a little more muscular and heavy, is fast for us. So when I picked up the pace, if I on some of the these intervals, you call them strides, I was if I misunderstood, or I didn't read what you'd written about the uh, level of effort I should put into that. So I saw that as an opportunity to, like you just said, because you feel good. You're like, well, there's only one way to know how far along I am, and then I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna haul ass. Sorry, and so I did, and I was like, it felt good to be to be running at a almost a max pace for a short, even if it was a short duration. It was that thing where we gradually build, and then for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, right in the very middle, I thought I was allowed. I had the green light to, for 5 or 10 seconds, just open up with everything I got, and then slowly taper down. And after, I can't remember, I did a few of those repeats, and then like maybe the third or fourth one, I'm like, oh, it's hurting, and then one or two more of those after that, I'm like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. This is hurting. Both tendons were hurting, and then we spoke, and you said, no, 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 you did them wrong. So yeah, I know what I did. I know what caused the most. It was trying to sprint, trying to stride
Yeah.
out before my hamstrings were ready. All the other exercises didn't seem. Oh well, the lying hamstring curls. Whenever I would, if the one where you lay on your stomach and you curl, for whatever reason, that particular movement seems to flare it up a tiny bit, not a lot. Um, but no, not the running too fast, running slow at a moderate pace didn't bother it at all. It's just
Hmm. And this
yeah,
is probably something that PHT sufferers can learn from this. When you run, when you increase your speed, the demand on your tendon isn't linear. Like if you progress your speed in a linear fashion, the demand that the requirements for the hamstring isn't linear. It's actually exponential. So, even if you are running at 75% of your max sprint and then you go to 100% of your max sprint, you're like doubling the demand of that hamstring. And so that's why it's why you've had such a reaction to those sprints. And usually within a formula, or like the benchmark kind of rules I sort of lay out for people. At that stage, we were doing all slow running, and then we started to piece in, okay, what does speed work look like? And so we implemented strides once a week, which would be 4 to 6 repeats of running for 30 seconds, like you said, slowly accelerating for 15 seconds. So you start slow, accelerate for 15 seconds. Once you get to your top speed, we run at that top speed for 8 to 10 seconds, and then we back off. But for in those early stages, that top speed, we sort of had a cap on at about like 75% of your max sprint, which like you say, you sort of fell away from those rules or misinterpreted those and thought it to go at 100%. And so that sort of miscommunication led to that flare up, which took a couple of days, couple of weeks to sort of settle down. Which sort of brings me to my next point. Like when you did have that flare up, what do you think you did well that brought it back under control, and how long do you think that sort of process took?
um seems common sense for me. Or is I avoided the things that hurt, and we continued the ones that seemed to, like, we were at that point, we had incorporated my sled push, and some lunges and we're doing both Romanian deadlifts and their standard deadlifts. And each one of those exercises at that point, before I flared it back up, I could tell that those things were really helping. I could tell it. Not only could I feel it immediately after, for about a half hour, I basically be pain free, which is weird. It slowly creeped back in, but just so I knew those exercises were helping me, and so I just got back to really focusing on those and try not to do not trying. I didn't do any more sprints. All of the running that we did from that point forward, I just, as you said, just monitor it and don't let it go above a certain level, pain threshold, and I stuck to that, and that I think that's what made the biggest differences.
Which is a good takeaway for most people if they do have a particular flare up. Is okay, we need to understand what's currently causing that irritation. So we said it was the speed work, like sprinting at that 100% max during those strides. So remove those, take them out for a couple of weeks to let things settle down. But like you said, you were quite in tune with your body and knowing what exercises actually felt really good, which turns out to be like the slow, heavy load stuff under, certain weights and certain ranges of movement and that sort of thing. And so we stuck to those and just waited for things to gradually settle and get back to baseline. And then we slowly introduced those that sprints again. Are you back to strides? Are you back to sprints? How are you feeling with those?
Yeah, I'm doing everything. I'm continuing everything as we left off. I'm sticking to all the strength movements, all the compress, or what do you call them? The loading movements, and then, but I'm going to stick with the program you had, right? I'm not going to return to the way I used to run. I found out that doing these, like having interval day and a slow run day, and then having some strides, doing that, I'm able to get the same running volume in a week without any pain. And I just did it. I've raced twice since then, and I haven't lost any of my VO2 max, I guess you could say, my output, my volume, my ability to either sustain a long run or a fast run didn't suffer at all by switching up the way my running training's going. So I'm just going to keep doing that. I'll do some strides once or twice a week. I'm doing these interval runs. I'm probably going to run that way forever now because it just feels good, and I'm not losing anything. And then I'll do maybe one long, really slow zone 2 comfortable run. And I'm just going to stick to that. And
so when you say the interval running sessions, they're walk, run, repeats.
Right.
With the strides, what's your current level like? So what does a stride session look like at the moment?
You know what I've been doing? I've been doing it by sometimes I've been doing it on a treadmill. So I've been doing it by time on the treadmill. But when I'm outside, I've just been doing it by a fixed distance. I just open up. I would just gradually start running and just open up. I'm going by feel, I guess. I don't have a set distance for or time. I want the foot turnover. I want to feel the muscles engage. I want to feel the tendon work, but I don't want to risk hurting it. So I'm not doing a ton because the sport I do doesn't need it. I just know that I need it for health, I guess, for my running fitness. So I'm not having to have a structured strides, I guess, right now. Or I haven't been. If that makes any sense.
One thing that I haven't really highlighted yet is like throughout your process, once we knew that you could tolerate some walk running, then we layered in like different stages of the hyrox protocol. Like we had the ski erg, we had the sled push, we had the wall balls, we had sandbag lunges, we had the rower, the farmer's carry, all that sort of stuff that were those stages in those events. And so I think it was like every week or so, we sort of just added in one station at a time, just seeing how that could be tolerated and sort of progressed through. And now you sort of, like you say, you're now doing events and going pretty well. I think one of my questions would be like, what do you think your weak link is, or your weakest link is right now? That's sort of you feel like you need to work on to get to your best performance.
It's still my running, only because again, the guys I'm competing against, they are lifelong endurance athletes who added strength to their. So when you look at this sport, like I said, it's eight zones and eight 1,000 meter runs. Those eight 1,000 meter runs take up about 50% of the total race time. So most, like the world champion in my age group, will finish this race in about an hour and 15 minutes. So about half that time is spent running. So if you could do 1,000 meter sprints, if I could shave a minute off of each of my 1,000 meter, not 1,000 meter runs, I could win the world championship, because my strength events, those portions, I'm already on par with the world champion. Um, so I don't really need much there. I need to be able to, and they call it compromise running. So it's a transition. A lot of endurance athletes don't realize until they do it how difficult it is to go from doing putting a 40-pound sandbag and lunge for 100 meters, and then immediately get up and start running, and then sprint for 1,000 meters, and then immediately push a 300 400-pound sled for 50 meters, and then again shift to sprint to running again, and be at top running speed within 5 seconds. You know what I mean? You don't have time to build up. That shifting of anaerobic muscles, uh, it is in itself something that has to be learned. So I need to be able to get up to speed and have my top speed be the same as the top runners. And these guys right now, they have the best in the world have. Most of the guys I beat, but when I'm talking about just the top guys in the world, we're talking they beat me by 30 seconds to a minute on each of those 8K laps. That adds up.
I should probably say, like, I've got your program in front of me. When we very first started working together was about August last year. So we're looking at 5 months, 6 months, and the progress you've made, it's been great. Back to competing, you've got like your world champs on the horizon, and so things are going really well. Is there anything in particular, if someone is suffering from PHT and they're really struggling to get in control of their symptoms or return back to their activities, is there anything based on your experience in your rehab or any tips and advice you might have for them if they're, finding that they're struggling?
Yeah, it's something I don't have, patience. But I learned having worked. You really do have to have a plan. I don't think you could do what I did for all those years and just kind of go by feel and massage here and take some ibuprofen this day and heat there. All these different gym. They call it gym bro or bro science. It wasn't working for me. It didn't work for me. I did it for years and years and years, and finally, you got to have a structured plan. And I definitely think those loading exercises. If I had to put my finger on one thing, I really think those loading exercises were the biggest difference maker of all of it. Everything I'm sure was an important ingredient, but having a plan and being pretty religious about the hip thrust, the lunges, those were later, but the hip thrust, the two different types of deadlifts, and not skipping them and being. I really think that those two things made the biggest difference for me, at least. I think.
Yeah, I think patience is a good one. And like you say, diligent and consistent with the things that work well. You have being an athlete, you have a nice in tune sense of, what feels good or what's good for the body. But like anyone, we can have our impatient moments and our frustrations. And I think, like we said in this podcast earlier, when you start feeling good, that's a real test of character to still be patient when things feel good, because we're all about long-term success. We're all about wanting to get 6 to 12 months from now and have a noticeable improvement back to your peak performance, rather than just having these boom bust cycles that a lot of people are familiar with, and then looking or being 6 to 12 months down the track and being at the same spot just because you've been impatient, you've had those boom bust cycles throughout that rehab process. So yeah, trust the process, be patient, be diligent, I think is some really nice lessons. Anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, other than thank you. You extended my competitive career, because I was already thinking I might have to move into something like cycling, or I'm very competitive, so I'd have to do something. But I wanted to continue doing the thing I love, and I really think I owe it to you, that I'm out there doing it again at a high level. So thank you.
Nice. Do you mind if I share your Instagram account? I actually didn't check with you beforehand, but are you okay with me to share that?
Sure.
Yeah, so it's San Diego Joey. If people want to follow your journey and see how the world champs go and your races, and there's some good hyrox footage on there as well. Yeah, looking forward to personally following your journey and seeing where it takes you in the next couple of events, the world champs and all that sort of stuff. And was really excited to have you on, and a good different rehab journey to what is usually on this podcast. So thanks for coming on, mate.
Thanks, Brodie. Appreciate it.
Thanks once again for listening and taking control of your rehab. If you are a runner and love learning through the podcast format, then go ahead and check out the Run Smarter podcast, hosted by me. I'll include the link along with all the other links mentioned today in the show notes. So open up your device, click on the show description, and all the links will be there waiting for you. Congratulations on paving your way forward towards an empowering, pain-free future. And remember, knowledge is power.